Hello and welcome to the Valley Voice, a videocast of the Western Tribune. The Valley Voice brings candidates, community leaders, and notable folks from across the state of Arizona to whatever device you're watching from. If you like what you hear, then please check out the Western Tribune at westerntrib.com.
I'm Matt Gress, and this is the Valley Voice.
Our first guest is Matt Gress, who's the director of the Arizona Governor's Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting, a former school board member, policy advisor, teacher, and Truman Scholar. Now he's running for the State House in the newly created Legislative District 4. Thank you for joining us today, Matt. Tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, where you're from, work experience.
Sure. And it's an honor to be your inaugural guest for the video series. Well, like so many Arizonans, I came here from somewhere else, small town Oklahoma. And I'm the youngest of four, raised by a single mom in a single wide trailer house. We did not have much at all. But one thing we did have was a close, tight-knit community in the small town. Of course, our mom, but our neighbors, our ministers, our teachers, all of them working with us, encouraging us to dream big and really kind of go forward and pursue our dreams. I put myself through college driving school buses, first in my family to go to college and graduate. And so education is really important to me. I was inspired by my teachers to go into the classroom. And I joined Teach for America, teaching 10th and 11th grade English in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that experience really crystallized for me one of the big causes of my life, a passion of mine, and that is that every child can and wants to learn, and that we owe it to all of the kids to rise to meet their high expectations that they have of us. It's kind of a flipped script, but we owe it to them to meet their potential. From there, I went to Syracuse University on the Truman Scholarship at the Maxwell School for public administration and an emphasis in state and local finance. And then I came out here. I worked at the Arizona legislature for the nonpartisan Joint Legislative Budget Committee, learning exactly where our tax dollars go. And working at JLBC, I ended up running for the Madison Elementary School Board. Again, very passionate about making a difference in the lives of children and families. Trying to make a difference in the same way that positive, encouraging adults made a difference in my life. Then I worked at the Corporation Commission as a policy advisor, learning a lot about the electricity, water, wastewater, broadband connectivity issues, among other things. And then in 2017, Governor Ducey appointed me as his director of the budget office. And our job is to collect information from agencies, certainly from the governor, and feedback from Arizonans that culminates in the annual executive budget that's submitted to the legislature. And in fact, we submitted the governor's final budget last Friday.
Why are you running for office? Give me the elevator pitch. I'm a voter in LD-04. Why should I vote for you?
We have serious issues in this state, whether it's education choice and transparency in spending and curriculum, whether it's backing the blue, supporting our law enforcement, the crisis at the border, where we have unprecedented numbers of those individuals who are entering our country illegally. The drugs and human suffering are at epic proportions. Whether it's election integrity and ensuring that only U.S. citizens can vote in our elections, which I think is very important. Natural resources and the environment. Water is a major challenge for this state, as well as grid resiliency, our electric sustainability. It's a multifaceted group of issues that I'm uniquely qualified to address in the legislature, having been involved in policy and politics in Arizona for nearly a decade. I think I'm ready to hit the ground running and to be a voice for Legislative District 4.
All right, LD-04 is in solid red. Biden won it by nearly 1% in 2020, according to numbers crunched by Data Orbital. What is your pitch in a general election? Why do you think you're going to be able to win that district?
People in that district expect bipartisanship and expect leaders who will listen to the voters across the spectrum. My work in the Madison Elementary School District, I was a Republican on a board with two independents, another Republican, and a Democrat. And when I ran for reelection, um, they all supported me across the spectrum because I was able to work in a collaborative effort and respectful effort to get things done for children and families in the Madison School District. And in the legislature, it's about forging coalitions, uh, not only within the Republican Party, but across party lines to serve Arizonans in the best way possible. There will be, of course, bedrock issues that we're going to have to agree to disagree on. I don't think you have to compromise your principles to serve in the legislature. But you don't have the monopoly on good ideas. No one does. And so by listening, being thoughtful, and showing that you care for your colleagues, I think that's what Legislative District 4 expects.
All right, you mentioned your public education history. Would you mind going into detail about what inspired you to become a teacher? What did you learn as a teacher? You can also feel free to talk about your experiences as a governing board member as well.
Well, my teachers inspired me to go into the classroom and teach. And, given the opportunities afforded to me because of my educational experiences, I felt compelled to give back and to contribute and to make a similar difference, whether it was in the classroom or whether it was in the governing boardroom. So again, my philosophy is that all kids can and want to learn, and that we all have to rise and meet their high expectations. I also believe that a zip code shouldn't determine how good of an education you get. We should have high quality educational options, as many as possible. And in working with the governing board, it's a legislative body. So you have four other board members, and you need a majority vote to get things done. But more often than not, we wanted to try to have unanimous votes. And the way that you do that is by being able to build consensus, listen, show humility and respect, even on areas where you just may not agree, but you can agree and not be or you can disagree and not be disagreeable. So I think those interpersonal relationships worked well for me when I was serving on the board, and that's why we were able to do a lot of big things: raising teacher pay, opening up choice for children in foster care so that they were moved to the front of the line in terms of our waiting lists. We were able to enhance school safety and school security, and really meet the needs of our community by setting up a budget advisory committee so that more taxpayers and parents had a seat at the table when it came to decision making of where the money went.
Kind of going into your budgetary advisory committee, what was your path into leaning into budgetary matters and fiscal policy?
I would say that you know you can have ideas about how you want to make things better, but if you don't have the resources to finance those ideas, they're going to remain just that. So, what became crystal clear to me, certainly at the legislature when I was a nonpartisan budget analyst, is to see kind of where the resources went and what values were reflected in those resources. And I think, certainly since uh, I've been with the governor, our values of where we've spent the money has been pretty clear: K-12 education, higher education, public safety, supporting the most vulnerable, our elderly, and other vulnerable adults and children. So, um, but none of those policies and none of those values would have been seen had we not put money behind it. And I think the budget is key to public policy making at the legislature because It's about who gets what, when, where, and how. And the budget touches virtually every facet of our life, whether it's a regulatory agency who charges fees to license or to investigate, whether it's the Department of Health Services and our health and welfare agencies that license and regulate hospitals, or review and check the orderliness of childcare facilities or nursing homes, public safety, keeping our roads safe, Department of Transportation, keeping our roads drivable, water resources and its effect on our water future. So there's just so many different, I could just tick through all of them, but the budget touches every aspect of our life. And the more you know about it, the more empowered you can be to advocate for the causes you care about.
Okay. How has your experience as the governor's budget director prepared you to serve in the state house?
One of the constitutional duties of the legislature that they have to do every year is pass a budget. That's really the only bill that has to be considered and taken up by the legislature. They have the power of the purse, as the framers derived the legislative body, and it's their job to oversee and enact funding for the state in various agencies and areas. My job as the budget director for the governor is to make a formal proposal to the legislature of how he thinks the state's resources should be allocated. And the legislature's job is to review that and to provide alternatives of certain spending levels or suggest new or different priorities. And the negotiation that occurs between the legislature and the executive is very complex, and it can be fast moving. And having my experience in the executive, I think, is a big asset for the legislature, because kind of the posture of how the executive acts in these budget negotiations. But you also have an informational advantage of knowing what's out there, what is in the budget right now. Very few lawmakers know the entire scope of the budget, which is really important if you have a key issue or area or idea that a lawmaker wants to see enacted. Again, ideas are great, but if you don't have the resources to support them, they're largely going to remain ideas. So I think that my experience as the governor's budget director is going to really enhance the legislature's influence into the budget process than we've seen in recent times.
Okay, now we're going to switch gears a little bit to this year's budget.
Sure.
What should Arizonans expect from the governor's proposed budget this year?
The governor is leaving the state stronger than he found it. We're already, when the governor came into office, we were facing a $1 billion deficit. The Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, the fund that thousands of Arizonans rely upon when they're out of work, was still recovering from the Great Recession. And so over the last several years, and we were mired in education lawsuits, among other challenges. We're now leaving the state with a projected $1 billion surplus. We're leaving the state with $1.4 billion in the state's rainy day fund, the largest dollar figure ever. Our unemployment insurance trust fund is over $1 billion, resulting in lower business taxes that support the solvency of the trust fund in years. Education funding is at all-time highs. Whether you adjust it for inflation or not, we are spending the most ever on K-12 education. We're spending the most ever on school facilities. We're putting in $1 billion for our water security. And we're addressing many of the state workforce needs so that we can stabilize our public safety, our troopers, our correctional officers, while meeting the needs that matter most to Arizonans: child welfare, finding more permanency for for children in DCS custody. These are all part of kind of a larger narrative that the governor has improved the state of our state. He's been responsible in managing the resources that we've had, and he's been able to give back more to Arizonans since he took office, with over $2 billion of tax relief since taking office. Those represent a record of conservative accomplishments that we'll see the dividends for years to come.
Okay, if you had to choose one, and I know it's difficult, what is the single most important item you believe is in this proposed budget?
It's a good question, because this is the boldest budget we've ever proposed in my tenure as budget director. Usually you would think that the last year that the governor is in office, he's considered what scholars call lame duck, and that it's kind of just keeping the lights on, keeping things running until the end of the administration. But we've had a unique opportunity, a confluence of unprecedented economic growth, massive increases in population. 1 out of 4 Americans moving in the country today are moving to Arizona. And then you've had federal stimulus that has resulted in, again, just a massive amount of cash flowing through the system. So we've had a number of unique opportunities in this budget that we wouldn't have had otherwise. I think what's really important in this budget this year is the governor's commitment to educational choice and results and accountability when it comes to what kids are learning. And there are a couple of components to that. One is a new program he's dubbing AZ Back on Track, where we're offering a summer camp using federal dollars that provides an intensive 8 to 10 week course this upcoming summer to help remediate much of the unfinished learning that's happened as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the interruptions to education. But we're also tackling schools that need additional intervention, D and F rated schools that have continued to be Ds and Fs and have not met the high expectations that kids have of us, providing them evidence-based tools to turn the ship, to get things back on the right track for those schools. And then finally, the schools that have been successful, we're modernizing and expanding what's called results-based funding, which provides A-rated and low-income B-rated schools extra support from the state to replicate and expand the number of seats available at these successful schools so that more Arizona children can take advantage of that choice.
Okay, so the governor mentioned investing $1 billion in desalination technology. Why should taxpayers invest money in desalination? What is it, and where will the tech be built and operate from?
So you're referencing the $1 billion commitment that the governor is making for water augmentation. About 30% or so of Arizona's water comes from the Colorado River. It's the second largest source of water in our state. And the Colorado River has a connection with Lake Mead. And, it's been several decades, we've been in a drought, and the water elevation at Lake Mead has continued to decline. And the further down it goes, there are triggers in a multi-state, multinational agreement that results in cuts of water deliveries, affecting primarily our farmers, which is a huge part of Arizona's economy. So what the governor proposed last year was an initial $160 million into this drought mitigation fund to start the conversation about how we can augment our water supplies, reduce our reliance on the Colorado River and the expected cuts that may occur later this decade, and find a way to help ensure that our farmers still have the freedom to farm, and that municipalities continue to grow, and that our economy continues to thrive. That fund is not necessarily committed to desalination technology. I think there are a number of different innovations in the water conservation and augmentation space that these dollars can be used for. The governor's budget this year includes a $1 billion deposit over 3 years into that fund, again, to help financially support the conversation about how we want to augment it. Desalination is one idea. The details are still being worked out between the speaker and the president and the governor and other key stakeholder groups. But ultimately, the state does have a responsibility to protect our water future. We're all in this together. And given the size of the Colorado River's contribution to our state, it is of statewide concern, and that's why we should be using state general fund dollars to continue our efforts in augmenting our water supplies.
Okay, cops and law enforcement have been a huge part of Governor Ducey's agenda. You yourself have said that you proudly support the blue. What parts of the budget do you view as beneficial to law enforcement in Arizona?
One of the essential functions of state government is public safety. So this budget has 3 key components that help advance our efforts in that area. One is focusing on trooper pay. We have nearly 20% of our trooper positions are vacant. We have over 480 vacancies at the Department of Public Safety. We have to staff up in order to have better trooper coverage on our highways, more detectives, more folks working at the labs so that we can process the tests and materials that are coming in. And the budget includes a 15% pay raise for sworn in civilian employees at DPS. If enacted, this would make our troopers some of the highest paid law enforcement in the state. So that will allow us to better recruit, not only within the state, but across the country. For those states that may not appreciate law enforcement, law and order, we're going to try to make the case that Arizona is the place for you to come because we will back the blue. The second thing is at our Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation, Reentry, our prison system. We have significantly high vacancy rates with our correctional officers. And when you have limited staff coverage, inmates have to stay in their cells for longer periods of time due to security situations. And that really undermines one of the key values of the Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation, Reentry, is the rehabilitation piece. So we're limited in providing substance abuse treatment services, educational services, work, allowing inmates to develop job skills that can prepare them to have a real second chance once they've served their time. So we're doing a 20% pay raise for our correctional officers, bringing them into the top 5 agencies in terms of salary. So that we think that will go a long way in helping reduce turnover in our vacancies. And we're already seeing some positive feedback from that as well. But we're including additional funding for capital at our correctional facilities, over $93 million, fully funding the annual building renewal needs for corrections for the second year in a row, while taking care of fire, life safety, locking projects, again, improving the safety of these facilities. But the other thing that we're doing is a 4-year, $140 million HVAC replacement. If you ever go to any of these, and hopefully you go to these prisons for the right reasons in terms of visiting and understanding the challenges and opportunities that ADCRR faces. But if you go there during the summer, you'll find that many of these facilities are cooled with swamp coolers. It's very uncomfortable. And the moisture has degraded a lot of our work metal components. They've degraded fire equipment, locking equipment, those types of things that we've invested a lot of money in. And it's just uncomfortable. So improving workplace hygiene, making it comfortable for staff to want to work there, and for inmates so that they're not agitated, and for our capital investments that we're making year in and year out. We're replacing all the swamp coolers with air conditioning over 4 years. which we think will have a major impact in being able to recruit and retain correctional officers. And the final piece related to law enforcement is the border. Last year, we invested $55 million in responding to the crisis at the border, deploying the National Guard and setting aside tens of millions of dollars for certainly DPS, the Department of Public Safety, but for our county sheriffs and the costs that they're incurring. This year, we're putting in another $50 million as part of a multifaceted approach to addressing the border. Increased patrols on both the state, county, and local levels, physical barriers, detention costs that are going to increase when we start locking up more domestic and foreign individuals who break Arizona law. And then also the court costs themselves of county attorneys prosecuting those who are breaking our law, and the court systems to handle the influx of cases. So we're doing what the feds have failed to do in securing our border, and we think that this investment will be the one that is reflective of what we've heard from those near the border in our border communities.
Okay, great. So for the final question of the interview, you're a young Republican. How do you view the state of the party in the nation, but particularly within the state? Does the party have the infrastructure to ride a potential red wave in 2022?
I was at the GOP county convention a few weeks ago, and if you were there, you would have seen an auditorium packed with a sea of red, a sea of excitement. People are deeply concerned about the direction of this country and where it's headed. And they're not alone. President Biden's approval ratings have plummeted. People don't trust him handling the economy, handling the border, handling our posture to our adversaries and allies around the world. Wherever you've seen the Biden administration go, failures have met him there. And this latest round of thank goodness for the Supreme Court striking down his unconstitutional OSHA mandates to force millions of Americans to get the vaccine and to take that choice away from them or lose their job. He's currently attacking our administration in trying to provide funding for children and families to find the right educational choice for them versus submitting themselves to COVID-19 mitigation measures that are recommendations and not mandates, and that really have deleterious consequences for student learning. So the party is energized and ready to go out there. There are so many new faces that I saw at that event. And I think we are really in the driver's seat to win across the board here in Arizona and around the country, to take back the Congress and to send a clear message that there's a new mandate, and that's one of freedom. So I'm very excited to see that take place this fall.
All right, well, thank you for joining us today, Matt. We really appreciate it.
Of course, thank you for having me.